Welcome to the Long Thread podcast about spinning, stitching, and weaving by hand. The podcast is presented by Long Thread Media, publishers of Spin-Off, Handwoven, Piecework, and Little Looms magazines. Find us online at longthreadmedia.com. Trinway Silks is where weavers, spinners, knitters, and stitchers find the silk they love. Select from the largest variety of silk spinning fibers, silk yarn, and silk threads and ribbons at trinwaysilks.com. You'll discover a rainbow of colors thoughtfully hand-dyed in Colorado. Love natural? Trinway's array of wild silks provide choices beyond white. If you love silk, you'll love Trinway Silks, where superior quality and customer service are guaranteed. Brown Sheep Company is a 4-generation family business bringing you high-quality wool and natural fiber yarns. We spin and dye U.S.-grown wool into hundreds of vibrant colors at our mill in western Nebraska. Our mill has something to offer for every craft, from our well-known knitting and crocheting yarns to wool roving for spinning and felting. We offer U.S.-made needlepoint yarn as well as yarn on cones for weaving projects. Learn more about our company and products at brownsheep.com. I'm your host, Long Thread Media co-founder Ann Marrow. Bea Bonanno is the U.S. distributor for Wooldreamers, a Spanish yarn company that celebrates that country's traditional sheep and wool. So, Bea, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about what you're doing with Farm and Fiber Knits, and it's cool to talk about all this fiber stuff. Love it.
All this fiber stuff. So you are based in Kansas, but your project is Wooldreamers, which is entirely in a totally different space. Can you tell me about Wooldreamers?
Yeah, so Wooldreamers is a yarn company based out of Spain. It's about an hour and a half outside of Madrid. We have our own scouring and spinning mill. It's been operated by the same family, the Cobo family, for the last 3 generations. They started off by making weaving blankets for agriculture. So horse blankets, other textiles needed for agriculture. And then as practices changed, markets changed, they acquired scouring and spinning equipment and transitioned more into yarn production. For most of the time that they've been operating, they've been producing wool for the rug industry. So it was more of a B2B sort of thing. Always natural wool, woolen spun, really hearty, nice wools. And they've always focused on traceable materials. So even before this project started, whether the wool was coming from Australia or New Zealand or wherever, they were making sure that they were sourcing quality wool from ranchers that are treating the sheep well and that the sheep are healthy, because it honestly, at the end of the day, affects the quality of the wool. So it's important all the way down for the benefit of the animals down to the fiber. Ramon, who is our founder and current operator of the mill, got the idea to start Wooldreamers in around 2019 when a dyer local to him asked if he had any bases that were spun from Spanish wool. And Ramon had grown up in this industry, and there's a lot of sheep in Spain, especially in the part where he lives in La Mancha. It's where Manchego cheese comes from. And he, as he was growing up, just saw that the wool industry in Spain was definitely suffering. The wool was considered more of a burden rather than a valuable resource, because the industry had shifted its priorities from raising sheep for wool to raising sheep for meat and dairy. It's a versatile animal. There's a lot of reasons why it's cultivated. And so he grew up witnessing this situation and wasn't happy about it, but didn't really know a way out or how to help. And it was through this indie dyer, essentially, that he was like, oh, is this something that people would want? And because he knows how to make yarn, but he doesn't use the yarn in a hand-working capacity at that time. He's actually kind of started weaving and knitting. Like, now that he's really in it, he's super in it. But it sparked this idea. And so he started off our first line, what is called the Hesa de Barea. And it is a pure Spanish Merino. The flock was started by monks 200 years ago.
Wow.
And the ranch itself sells breeding stock. So they don't slaughter the sheep. The sheep are not for anything other than wool. And their main focus is to create the highest quality wool to help other ranchers breed that quality into their flocks as well. So that was our first line. Our second line is our Mancholopi, and that is our first waste wool collection. And that is spun from the wool of the Manchega sheep. So that was kind of how we got started. It's been about 4 years now coming up, and we've expanded our lines. We have more single origin lines, more waste wool lines. So it's very exciting.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the Manchalopes is your first waste yarn. What does that mean?
So a waste yarn is yarn produced from a material that would typically be getting composted or burned. Since it's primarily a dairy sheep, it's not being raised for the wool. But that doesn't mean it's not a good material to work with. So sort of encapsulating the heritage of the region with this incredible cheese, with this really special breed, and the way that these particular flocks are being made, it really just sort of aligns with our whole mission to use the wool that these sheep are producing to create our Mancholopi.
So if you weren't making this yarn, it would literally be thrown away?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so that goes for also the wool that's used in our Mota and Cautiva and Sauna lines as well, which are some of our most popular collections. Yeah.
Do you have to do anything special for these? I mean, if they're not being raised for wool, is there something that's special that the shepherds need to do to make sure that their fleeces are in tip-top shape?
Well, I think at first, because we're about 4 years in now, I think at first there was definitely more dirt, more skirting needing to be done. We do need the ranchers to not mark the sheep with like spray paint on the side of their flank, So just different practices in regards to how clean the sheep are, how much skirting gets done ahead of time, and just how the shepherds are keeping track of all the sheep. So yeah, a little bit of a shift, but I think the return over the years has become so evident that they're happy to be making these shifts.
I just love that being more efficient, bringing more back to the shepherds, having a little bit, hopefully more for the welfare of the sheep. And, how wonderful to make something out of what would otherwise be nothing.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Manchalopes, and when I think about wool in Spain, of course, I think of the Merino, but what are the other breeds that you work with?
Yes. So the Merino we work with is like the original Spanish breed. So it's a little bit different from what people have grown accustomed to in regards to micron, but it's sort of just like the prototype of Merino. And yes, we do work with the Manchega sheep, which is a breed specific to the region that we're based in La Mancha. And they're the sheep that produce the milk for Manchego cheese. We also work with a breed called Merina Entrefina, which is the Spanish Merino crossed with Churro, which is also an Iberian regional sheep that got brought to the Americas. So a lot of the Navajo-Churro that we see have been brought over from Europe in the 1600s. We also work with some really small breeds that are really, really hyper-focused, like there's one from Mallorca that just exists in Mallorca called Roja Mallorquina. There's a breed called Gira, Navarra, Ripolesa, and all of these sheep are generally raised for their wool by the people that are cultivating them. They're just such small populations that they can't necessarily be used for a large mass production. But we have some smaller, more capsule lines called breeds and other versions of our yarns that you can get these sort of like micro collections of really special wool to work with.
Are they all different from each other? Like, do you pick one up? I'm thinking about cheese and how you pick up a cheese and you say, oh, I know what cheese this is.
Totally. Yeah. So, looking at the Gira versus the Marroquina, you'll see different kind of almost like a reddish hue in some of them. The guard hairs that are still in there are a little bit brown. So there's just different richnesses in tone, the springiness and the bounciness can kind of vary from breed to breed. With everything being woolen spun, there is a lot of air and movement in the yarn as you just sort of like play with it and knit, crochet, whatever. But yeah, I mean, as you're working with it, you can really feel a difference from one breed to another. And, some breeds are a little bit coarser than others. So we'll be using them like the Navarro. We're using it more for our rug wool, tufting wool, embroidery wool, not necessarily things that you would wear. Others do really well in the Lopi style version rather than other breeds would. So it's just sort of applying the strengths of this particular fiber to what's going to make the best yarn that people are going to want to work with.
So there's kind of like a different wool for every use, even within Wooldreamers.
Completely. Yes. Yeah.
And now a word from our sponsors. Appalachian Baby Design offers sustainably sourced yarns, kits, and patterns for crafting heirloom quality gifts for the family. Their U.S. organic cotton and Shanico sportweight wool are soft, resilient, and washable, perfect for creating lasting pieces. Whether knitting, crocheting, or weaving, for beautiful creations that will be cherished for generations, start with AppalachianBaby.com. And now back to the show. And this whole idea of waste wool, I think for knitters, often or any sort of fiber people who value wool, people who are into natural fibers really value wool. And so sometimes it's a little bit shocking to realize how much wool can be, as you said, a burden, a waste product. So does Ramon find it challenging to make value out of something that other people are trying to find a place to get rid of?
I think at first, yes, because there was a lot of convincing that needed to be done. Over the years, Spanish wool not only wasn't valued, but it had gotten a particularly bad reputation in general. When they were tagging the sheep, instead of doing maybe a little mark on the nape of the neck, they were just putting a mark just right there on the prime part of the fleece. There were some chemicals used to sort of like prevent, fly strike or things like that. We never work with any muesling breeds or flocks, but, it just developed a bad reputation. So kind of even just convincing the ranchers that the wool is valuable took a lot. Finding the shearers that can go out and, consistently work hard and, shear hundreds of sheep within a few days is hard to find. But, when you get your initial plug into the community, everybody knows each other on some level and word of mouth has grown. And so kind of the whole concept has really expanded. More and more ranchers are reaching out, wanting to work with us, hoping that they can supply us with wool because they'll get a great return. We'll turn it into something beautiful and it will become an incredible piece that someone's going to value. So I'd say in a relatively short amount of time, what became a challenge has now opened up into a whole new avenue for people cultivating wool that they didn't even really know was going to be an option. Yeah.
I've talked to a shearer who has as a sort of a passion project to convince people who are shearing for the sake of, the animal's well-being. If you take a little bit better care of the wool, it could be
something.
It could be something, but it's also, it's not just that there's something that ranchers don't know about. It's like, no, these really do have costs associated with, so somebody had to take a big risk there.
Yeah. And it's expensive for the shearers too, keeping your equipment sharp for the safety of the sheep. And it's physically demanding and just, it's a sweaty and difficult job. And you're kind of wrestling all day, and you want to do it well and fast so that the sheep isn't super upset afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So this started with one kind of local indie dyer, but we're talking, and you're in the U.S. obviously.
Yep.
Besides Spain and besides this one indie dyer in the U.S., what is the reception to this yarn like?
People are really excited about it. There's a lot of unique qualities to our yarn. Several of our yarns are spun in a Z twist. So that's wonderful for crocheters, but knitters are noticing that kind of difference in their own work as well. It just sits on the needle very differently. The woolen spun quality really allows it to be worked, all of our lines to be worked at a variety of gauges, depending on how you want to work it. I think our colorways, we work with a dye house in Barcelona, and they've produced some incredible colorways with us. Mota is one of our most popular lines, and it has an incredibly deep color range, both heathereds and solids. So there's just a lot of fun ways to explore. If you're someone that loves your neutral naturals, we have incredible options for you. If you like bright, crazy, fun colors, there's also tons to dive into there. Our unspun wool is providing something, not necessarily unique to like Scandinavian countries or anything like that. And, people are familiar with like Lopi style and things like that. But with it being not spun, obviously, but made out of a wool like manchega that doesn't have the guard hairs. It's a bit softer and bouncier. And the lightweight quality that you get from it is just incredible. So, and, I'd say our materials are kind of more of your bread and butter yarns. They're workhorse yarns. They're not going to pill on you because we spin a little bit tighter than a lot of people are used to when they first feel a merino yarn. And while that may kind of skew your perception of what it's like, what it actually is going to do is perform for years. The things that you make out of our yarns are going to last forever and not pill on you. It's crazy.
And I think it sort of dovetails with, and maybe this is just the perspective that I have, but interest in kind of woolly wools, things that feel like wool and not something that is apologizing for being wool in a way.
Yes. Yeah. We are very dedicated to the wool diehards about, everything we do. And I feel like it's just when you're working with something that, you're at your craft circle or whatever, and they're like, oh, what are you working with? It could just be a basic undyed natural. Oh, it's this yarn, but here's this incredible story behind it. It comes from a female-owned ranch. They're organically raised, and like every single line we have has a story behind it, whether it's the materials that we can trace exactly down to a single ranch, or it's salvaged and it's named after a really important cultural thing within the community that we're based. There's just a lot there to kind of get you excited and give you a background. Once you've been knitting for years and years, you've made hundreds of sweaters, it's just like, well, this one is cool because of this background behind it, what I can tell you about it more.
So tell me about it. So the manchega, I know about the sheep link, but tell me more about some of these great stories.
Yeah. So the Manchalope comes from two flocks. One is an all white flock and another is an all brown flock. And so between those two flocks coming together, we've created a natural gradient. So we have an undyed white down to an undyed, like deep chocolatey brown that is just like so gorgeous. And then we have 3 gradient steps in between. Then we have several dyed colors. Some are dyed on the white, some are dyed on the more gradient, deeper tones. And they're just really wonderful to work with. Both of those flocks are raised kind of wild. They're sort of just out on the land. When it's time to shear them, they have to get the sheepdogs to bring them in. It's not like they're penned in. So that's a really cool, special thing about those wools. The Mota is sourced from dairy ranches, all within 145 kilometers of our mill.
Wow.
So it's very local. in regards to the materials that we're working with. And, the farthest away thing about it is that the dye house is in Barcelona, but I mean, it's still in Spain. So you'll see on the label, it just calls out local wool.
Right.
And you're like, what is that? Well, it's a kind of a melange of all the different dairy sheep in that area. And it takes the dye beautifully, and it's really wonderful to work with. So we have the Mota and then the Cautiva, which is a smaller put up, lighter weight, same material, just 2 different gauges that you can work with. A lot of the same colors are in both lines. And then we also took that same wool and blended it with a cotton sourced in Andalusia and produced our sauna collection. So that is a wonderful warm weather or hot-bodied person yarn. It's a 50-50 wool cotton blend. And what's really cool about Spain is that the different climates and land qualities do produce a lot of different, we can have cotton, we do have bast fibers. So it's really just about finding the sources for these materials. So even the cotton that we're using is from Spain and in a region that has a long cotton cultivating history. La Rinconada, which is featured in this upcoming issue with you guys, is a really special line, and it comes from a single ranch. It's kind of one of our single origin lines. And I briefly mentioned earlier, it comes from a female-owned ranch. The ranch has been in her family for generations, and now she is in charge. And she is really primarily concerned with the land health and is working to reforest as much as she can of the land. And the sheep are an integral part of that, improving the soil health. And so she's working with a lot of different interesting groups within the EU for water conservation. The sheep drink from fountains that only turn on from their little RFD chip in their ear.
Oh my gosh.
And then
amazing.
Whatever's left over gets refiltered and recycled for the next time.
Wow.
So the sheep are part of this holistic vision that she has for this fairly large plot of land that she is in charge of. And it's not just for producing an income. It's for sort of the responsibility of stewarding this parcel of land that she is lucky enough to take care of and share that with her children, who will eventually be in charge of it. And so that's a really special one. She does have black and white merino. So again, that's a line that has a natural gradient from deep to light. And then we've over dyed that. And so you get 4 different tones that go from really bright to super rich. And those are some of my favorites. It's really some of those colors I'll just be holding in my hands, and it's just wow, just feel emotions from it, because there's just so much depth and texture. And there's even our 100% wool lines have a really spongy, cottony feel to them. I feel that a lot of them are actually even pretty comfortable just directly on the skin. You don't necessarily have to have an underlayer. And that comes down to the quality of the wool and the quality of the spin. And that there's not a lot of fibers that are sticking out that would scratch you. Honestly, I say, whenever something is scratching you with our wools when you're wearing them, you look and it's a bit of farm. It's a little bit of straw or grass or something that's still stuck to the wool. And I've found that people really enjoy that aspect of it too. It's super fun. We have a whole range of yarns called breeds, and those are spun from specific breeds throughout Spain, like Majorca sheep and the Rioja. And so those are kind of our micro lines, and the labels have a gorgeous portrait of the sheep themselves on the label. So it's another very personal touch, very intimate connection that you have with the materials and the storyline. And we've primarily have been focusing on garment yarns, accessory yarns, but there is a breed, like I mentioned before, the Navarra, that is a bit coarser. So we've kind of gone back to the mill's roots and produced a rug yarn out of it, but also a lovely little 2-ply embroidery yarn called Nisi. And it comes in these like little gumball 10-gram skeins that are so fun and really nice to work with.
So what do you guys have coming up next?
So our next line, we're really excited about because it really speaks to one of our deepest values as a brand. It's called 90 Varas, and it's going to be a line of yarn produced from wool from sheep that are raised along traditional shepherding routes throughout the year. So that's going to launch on October 3rd, and it is a really lovely 2-ply, mostly heathered palette. And it's a contribution from 6 different flocks that are raised along these routes that were established in the 1300s. The name 90 Varas comes from the measurement required for the widths of these roads. So when the roads were established, the king was like, they need to be this wide. And a vara is an old unit of measurement. It's a really wonderful yarn to work with. I've actually had great success working with it on multiple gauges from a US 1 up to a 6. It blooms out gorgeously. So I think people are really going to like it. And there's some gorgeous colors to play with.
If it's heathered, does that mean that the base wool is in different colors?
Yeah. So the sheep are white and there's some brown. And so we kind of blend them to create a kind of warmish gray. And then we can dye that on top of it. And actually, some of the colors were dyed to get as close as possible to some of the other breeds that we've worked with. This sort of like really beautiful tawny, not quite red, but just a little dip. Because, it's like finding inspiration in the other breeds that we've seen.
That's so interesting. When I think about wool in Spain, when I think about the properties of the Merino, it was the fineness and the whiteness and the brightness and all that. But it's wonderful to look around and see how rich the other options are, especially for smaller batches, if you're not trying to make the exact same yardage over and over.
Yeah. And so, when it comes down to when you have a flock that does have a mix of different colors, sorting out the tones when it comes to carding the material, the fibers together, getting those ratios correct by weight consistently. There's always going to be essentially not a dye lot if it's undyed, but your lot, you want to try and keep it as consistent as possible. And that's why we really want to work with ranches that are taking care of the sheep, because the stress affects the wool. You can look at a steeple of wool and you can see what kind of year that sheep had. There will be bands where nutrition is affecting certain qualities of the wool, good or bad. If a predator gets into the flock, you can see it right there in that little part.
Weather,
absolutely. And so to be able to create as consistent a product, a natural product, a customer that's going for a natural product is going to have to know that there's going to be a natural variety within that from year to year. But we want you to be able to, I love that sweater that I made so many years ago. I want to make another one for myself or a loved one. I want to know what I'm going back to. Right. And so just the care that it takes to honor not just the pure white sheep, but also the ones that do have these more challenging multi-tonal coats or deeper coats where maybe the wool is slightly coarser or the tips are a little bit bleached, is super important as well, because we want to honor that these are animals that want to live outside and want to be more or less left alone. Pia, who is the rancher of La Rinconada, her main means of taking care of the sheep is observing the land. Because when you go out into the field to see the sheep, they are, as soon as they see you, they're gone. They're off. They don't want to be around you. So what you do is you walk around and you make sure that there's enough of this plant or that plant. And she knows exactly why they need this one versus that one more. sort of just like inspecting the droppings that you can find and making sure that those look good. So, just trying to really honor the animal itself, the best way for it to live, and being respectful of the qualities of the wool and not expecting a super regimented commercial like thing every single time, but trying to work within that to create as much consistency as possible.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that something you were teaching in a workshop. This is not your original family business. You're not,
no.
Ron's cousin or anything like that.
Yeah. Yes. So, adopted family.
So how did you come in Kansas? How did you become the U.S. rep for this very Spanish company?
Yeah. So through another family connection, essentially. So my grandma, Martha, who is an incredible woman, so cool. She is originally from Topeka and moved to Spain in the 80s for a job. She's a librarian, and she worked for a place called the Juan Mauch Foundation and worked in like science grant funding and research and things like that. And over the years, she found out that Merino sheep, the pride of Spain, one of the highest quality materials, whether or not you're a yarny person, know about Merino. You might not know it's from Spain, but you know about Merino. She found out that even the Merino sheep in Spain were not being raised for their wool, and that the ranchers actually found the wool to be a burden. And she's the kind of woman that is like, well, I can fix that. So her kind of retirement project was to start raising sheep and creating wool and learning how to work with it. So she and her friend, she primarily lives kind of close to Avila, which is an old walled city, but maybe about an hour away from that in the mountains in a town called Hoyos del Collado. It's very small. And she shared a flock of sheep with her friend, and they maybe had, 20 to 50 sheep, not industrial level by any means. But over the years, they were producing more wool than they could keep up with their spinning wheels. And eventually, sort of just based off of their concept behind why they wanted to have sheep and why they were raising the wool, she applied for a grant competition for rural businesses, and she won. And she received this grant to get her wool spun at a mill. And that is how she met Ramon. The mill is called Mantex Man. It's in the province of Cuenca. And we're in a town called Mota del Cuervo. So that's where Mota comes from, the name. There's a lot of windmills around. So the story of Don Quixote, it's all woven into the story behind our wool. She and Ramon really hit it off because he had already started to pursue this Spanish wool project and was struggling a little bit with it, because again, he worked in B2B. He hadn't worked in handcrafting with wool. So he was still sort of trying to find the inroads to find the market for this. He's like, oh my goodness, you're American. Do you know any Americans that could help us bring it into the States? And I myself studied textiles. I worked at Yarn Barn of Kansas for a long time. I still teach there. And the timing was just kind of perfect for me to sort of take on this role. And it's been so fun. I don't really even feel like I'm necessarily trying to do a sales pitch. I'm just telling the story. And I've been lucky enough to find people that are just as excited about it as we are story-wise. And then they feel the yarn and work with it and they fall in love.
Yeah.
So that's how I got involved. I really, truly started in about the September of 2021. So about 4 years in and growing strong and finding our people and our community. And it's really exciting stuff.
It's interesting that you were talking about rug yarn, and I come to this as somebody who primarily thinks like a knitter and a spinner, but a knitter. And so rug yarn is not really part of my awareness, but you have a background as a weaver.
Yes. Yeah. So I weave, and in my sort of passion, what feeds my soul truly is weaving. I primarily weave tapestries, but I also do rugs and things. And working at a shop like Yarn Barn, that is such a resource for the weaving community. You get exposed to a lot of different materials because there's a lot of different textiles that can be produced. We, of course, have a huge selection of handworking yarns for like knitting and crochet, and you can do anything with anything. Just because it's in the weaving section doesn't mean you can't knit or crochet with it, and vice versa. There's also a lot of spinning wools too. Mm-hmm. But, different applications for fiber crafts are going to require different materials. Like, you're not necessarily going to use your loosely spun, beautiful alpaca blend for something that's going to live on the floor. Mm-hmm. Or for a hand towel, And so you really learn a lot about every wool, every fiber has its value and its use. Mm-hmm. And the thing about rug wool is that it's typically made from the coarser wools because those are actually sturdier, mm-hmm. and they're less expensive because they're slightly less valued because, I'd say primarily natural fibers are used in garments, mm-hmm. more than home applications. And so they're tightly twisted so that they can be really durable. So that just creates a whole different texture that people that are primarily working in handcrafts aren't necessarily familiar with. But yeah, when we developed our rug wool, it's called Cuenca, which is named after the province we're based in. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's strong, spongy. I love weaving tapestries with it. I've woven rugs with it. You can also work with it by hand for bags or toys, things like that. I have spoken to some people that were like, oh, I would wear that. And I'm like, great, yep. Wear it. It's a really solid yarn. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our yarns have a bit of air in them. They're kind of squishy. And you'd find that, in a lot of handworking yarns that when you squeeze it, it can compress mm-hmm. quite a bit. And this one, it just doesn't. It's just solid. So that's going to make for a really hardy rug that's going to last for years and years.
I think of it for punch needle as well. That sort of.
Punch needle is wonderful. That was a big avenue that we were trying to target with this line. Yeah.
It's interesting because I know that there are several smaller independent yarn and fiber companies that are sort of associated with Yarn Barn. I got something from them recently mm-hmm. about an independent box they're doing. So this sort of little mm-hmm. incubator there.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I was talking to Susan about it. I was there this past weekend and we were talking about brown sheep, and when brown sheep was just getting started and he was sort of just driving around looking for stockists, they were one of their first stockists.
Wow.
Yeah. And, that's another almost kind of like a parallel storyline too, of a right. family mill that keeps going, and they make wonderful, wonderful yarns as well.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting. It's local wool. It's certainly not local to me, but it's part of my understanding of wanting to knit mm-hmm. locally, even if it's only spiritually locally.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like any kind of DOP product.
What's
like
DOP?
DOP is an acronym, and it's like designation. It's a protected designation. Oh. So if you want to call this cheese Manchego cheese, mm-hmm. it has to be made in this region. It has to come from this sheep. There's all of these different things. And there's a DOP protections for like San Marzano tomatoes. Mm-hmm. It's a global designation, cultural products from all over the world. I believe it is mostly used for food items, but you'll see it. Yeah.
Parmigiano Reggiano or all of those French wines.
Yes. Yes. Right. Like in Italy, if you're producing Parmigiano, you have to send it to the bank, the Parmesan bank, everyone, they all go there, so there are these things,
I want an account at the cheese bank.
Yeah. Well, there's this incredible story of there was an earthquake and the bank got damaged and a lot of wheels of cheese got damaged. And there was this chef that developed a risotto recipe that used the damaged wheels.
Wow.
And they sent it out. They sold all the damaged wheels because it was bad enough that it could have threatened the entire Parmesan economy. So it's little stories like that of, protecting and maintaining practices and also just these like treasured goods from all over the world. Like it's important.
Yeah. Well, I think of it as also sort of like participation, like what you're doing is participating, as a consumer, you get to be part of the story, and or support the story. And it's kind of, to me, related a little bit to the idea of Patreon, where you get to be a patron of this yarn.
Yeah. Yeah. And a patron of sort of reestablishing fiber industry outside of what it shifted to starting in the 70s and 80s, where a lot of production shifted to countries that are taking advantage of poor labor practices and driving prices low, driving quality super low, introducing materials and techniques that are harmful to people and the environment, and wanting to really change that and see the change. And for a brand that is as focused as we are on ecology and protecting heritage breeds, we also are really concerned with keeping it at a price point that is accessible too. It's not going to be as economical as your pound of red heart, but red heart is inexpensive for a lot of supply chain reasons and material reasons. And, not to dig against acrylic wool for people that love and want to work with it, but there's just different concerns and I think a lot of education and understanding and expectation that I think has been lost. And so we're really happy to kind of provide an opportunity for people to participate in trying to bring about a different future that's sort of actually looking to the past. There used to be hundreds of mills like ours in Spain, and now there's 3. So, yeah. And we see that in the United States. There's always going to be these sort of bottlenecks in the production. So like in the United States, scouring and dye houses are where things get caught up. And it's similar in Spain too, and across the world. And just because it has become so expensive in relation to countries that are producing things at super, super low prices at the cost of quality of life for humans.
Right. And sheep.
Yeah. And sheep.
So what does the landscape look like in Europe for that kind of thing? I'm mostly aware of, to the extent I understand it at all as a consumer, but the local movement in American fiber, American wool, and also, a little bit of awareness of how textiles work in South America, that a lot of American wool is imported from South America. What does the landscape look like now for wool and handcraft in Europe? Yeah.
In Spain. Yeah, I think people are, just like they are here, they are really motivated to work with something that does link to heritage or people that they can potentially truly go visit and have a positive experience, not leaving being like, yikes, I can't believe that we're getting things from a place that is treating their laborers in this manner. I think, again, the story is very compelling. It's sort of like you have a material in your hand and then your knowledge about it goes so much farther than just the immediacy that you have with the product. You can find out so much about it. You can go onto our website and socials and see incredible drone footage of the landscape that it's coming from. And I think we're also seeing it in commercial products as well. There's a lot of brands in the United States that are really focusing on using heritage wool sourced in the United States, but also like that sweater brand Baba. They're based in Spain and they use Spanish wool. And so we're starting to see these really highly valued products, even ready-made products, shifting their focus to materials. And I think that's been starting for probably at least a decade, probably more, but getting louder and more prevalent in the past decade as people really are shifting their focus or, coming up in an industry. At one point in my life, I worked in fashion and, working on a mass brand versus a small brand. And, if you're competing with a huge multinational company, why buy your sweater? That is probably as expensive, if not more. And it's the story and it's the materials and it's the reason why it's important and why you want to reach for it and support the company that's making it.
Yeah. So what does the Wooldreamers team look like now? Is it still just Ramon and your grandmother?
No. And, we never worked with any of her wool because she just has a small amount. And now she just has 3 and they live right next door to her and they're named after my cousins. But it's a lot of the family, cousins, uncles, they all work there and community members that work, it's a great job in the community to have. So I'd say there's probably at least 20 people that work in our office and then much more that work in our mill, in the scouring mill, in the spinning mill. We also work with a foundation that provides work opportunities for people that are differently able, that can't necessarily have your office job or labor job. And so a lot of our labeling is done there. So we're really trying to always figure out who we can bring into this work because people want to work. People want to do things with their life, and we live in a society where you need an income. And so if you're lucky enough for your income to be coming from something that you feel excited about or passionate about or that you really believe in, that's a luxury. I mean, it's very, very lucky. It's like even my days where I'm just emailing, it's like I care very much about why I'm emailing.
Yes.
So I think just the value of the type of work that we're able to do with this is really, really important.
I'm excited about this new wool that you have in October. I'm just imagining the sheep wandering up and down, although at this point the wool is off the sheep and it's in the mill.
They're starting on next year's collection,
very nice.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. So I mean, it's beautiful. Again, we've got incredible footage and photographs. The label has a wonderful illustration of a shepherd walking with his flock.
Yeah.
And so it's just we just want people to feel connected to the reality of where their material is coming from.
Yeah.
Because it comes from somewhere and it's touched hundreds of hands and thousands of decisions have been made for every component, the people raising the sheep have had to make choices and labor, people shearing it, us scouring it, how we work with it, how we sell it, how your shop presents it to you, and the choices you make as a maker to work with it. I mean, it's just a lot of consideration goes into every single thing we do as makers.
Well, and we'll include links to your website so that people can check out that footage for themselves and see all those.
Yes, absolutely.
See all those stories. Well, Bea, thank you so much.
Yes,
we have loved working with your yarn for a couple of designs and just so excited to know more about it. Thanks to our sponsors for supporting the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Long Thread Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again.